Hi guys, it's Aoife from Words of Clover and I am here with my Irish Readathon TBR / recommendations video for 2021. If you haven't seen the initial Irish Readathon announcement and challenges video, I will leave that linked above and below for you guys to see. We are also hosting a giveaway this year for our group read, which is the Henna by Adiba Jaigirdar for Irish based readers. So if you are in Ireland and you want to win a copy of this book, go to that video and leave a comment and you'll be in with a chance to win it. The competition is open until March 3rd, so you have another little bit until that's closed and you might be in for a chance to win this book. So obviously the group read, as I said, is the Henna Wars, and I'm really excited to read this, so this is obviously on my TBR. This does actually just naturally fit into one of the prompts that we have for the readathon this year, which is to read a book that is written or is about a person of colour or an author or characters within the queer community, and this is both. This follows an Indian Irish girl who is growing up in Ireland, and her parents are quite religious, and when she comes out to them it doesn't really go very well. And then this also follows her relationship with another girl in her class and a school project that brings the two of them together, and they kind of start developing feelings for each other, and it just sounds really cute. There's been a lot of hype around this book over the past year and I've been saving it for this readathon. Yeah, I can't wait to read this one and I think it's going to be really good. Our promise that we do every single year is just to read a green book. This doesn't necessarily have to be an Irish book, but it just means that people who might not have access to Irish titles or Irish authors can still take part in the readathon in some way just by reading the green book. So for my green book, I was going to pick up Graham Norton's Homestretch, which is his newest novel. I've read Graham Norton's other two novels and I've really enjoyed it. This one is a little bit of an odd one because it's kind of a colour between blue and green. It's not like in-your-face blue, but it's not in-your-face green either, so I think it can kind of fit for this challenge. I will have a look around to see if I have other green books on my shelves or on my Kindle that I can read instead of this one, but this one will be read during the readathon anyway, but it kind of fits in with this prompt because it is this kind of wishy-washy colour between the two. The title itself, this is kind of a green colour anyway, at least, so there's a little bit of green on this. The second prompt is to read a non-fiction book. I have two books that are on my TBR that I want to read for this. One I bought last year and is 32 Words for Field by Monaghan McGann. And this is a book that's kind of about the Irish language. Monaghan is a Gaeilgeoir, which means that he is fluent in Irish, and he, I think, almost exclusively speaks in the Irish language, which is amazing. I am someone who tried to do Irish in school. We all have to learn Irish in school up until like we leave school when we're 17 or 18, and I just never got the grasp of Irish, especially in school. And I think the way it's taught in school in Ireland isn't particularly well, especially in most schools, and I've always been really jealous of people who are like native speakers of the language. And it's something I would desperately love to do, and if I could redo a time when I was younger, it would be to go back and try and learn as much Irish as I could, because I just think it would be a great thing just to have, and especially like just something close to our culture and our history and things like that. So yeah, I do sometimes feel sad that I am not fluent in Irish, and it's something I would love to change someday, but I think this will be really interesting because it's just kind of, I think it goes through kind of different words in Irish and like what they mean, and kind of the historical, I think, ties with some words. And yeah, it's just an exploration into Irish and particular words in Irish, and I just think it's going to be a really lovely read, and it might be really interesting, and again it might really spark that urge inside of me to try and learn a bit more Irish maybe in the next year or so and just get a little bit better at it, because I was fairly awful at it in school. It's just not something that clicked with me, and I would love to rectify that. And the cover of this is just absolutely beautiful as well, and I'm really looking forward to reading this. Non-fiction book that I have is one that I just bought recently, and is one that I am very eager to read, but I think is going to be a very hard read, and it is called Republic of Shame by Keelan Hogan, and this is How Ireland Punished Fallen Women and Their Children. And it's quite a short book, but the writing in it is quite small. And it is a non-fiction look at basically the mother and baby homes that operated in Ireland for years and years, for decades, and basically women who were fallen, so women who maybe were impregnated outside of marriage, whether this be through, you know, consensual relationships or rape or incest, abuse, things like that. Women who found themselves in this situation were often abandoned in these homes by either a parish priest, a relative, a father, a mother, and they were left in these homes. They were treated absolutely horrifically by the people who ran these homes, which was the Catholic Church at the time, and particularly the nuns who would run these places, who often were there like with the women when they were giving birth. A lot of the women were never allowed to hold their children. They weren't allowed to care for their children. Some of the children were adopted out. A lot of the children from these homes actually ended up being adopted out into America. And there is a movie that kind of looks at that called Philomena. It's kind of hard to talk about because there's so much history around it, and it's still very, very raw in Ireland, and it's a very recent history for us, and it's a really big source of shame that these women were locked away. These children were treated horrifically. The women were treated horrifically. The children were borderline murdered, and a few years ago a mass grave was found of these children's bodies. A lot of them were newborns. I think the oldest skeleton was only maybe 3 or 4 or something like that, and basically it's like Ireland's greatest shame is what happened to these women. And there's never been, I don't think, like a proper official apology from the Catholic Church to what they did to these women, and it's just something that's very hard to wrap your head around. And I think this book will be very interesting to just see what it explores and what is said, and yeah, it's going to be a very tough read, but I think it'll be a very important one. For a recommendation for this category, I'm going to recommend a book that I read a couple of years ago that I loved, and that was Mary Robinson's autobiography called Everybody Matters. This is her memoir. Mary Robinson was the first female president of Ireland. She was also the UN Commissioner for Human Rights, and she's also part of, I think it's the Elders, that was created by Nelson Mandela, and yeah, she just has a lot of really interesting things to say about her life and the politics that she grew up around, the politics that she got herself involved in, her time as president as a relatively young woman, and as a mother, and you know, how she was supported by her family, by her husband, and then as she went on to become the High Commissioner in the UN, and the people she met, the things she did. Yeah, it should be very, very interesting. So it's really, really interesting. I absolutely loved it, and I definitely recommend it for other people who are interested in particularly women in politics, and women in politics who kind of strived, you know, ahead of their time as well, and particularly in like when Mary Robinson was obviously in politics and was going for senator and then president. She was obviously in like a world of men as well. There wasn't as many female politicians at the time. So yeah, she's just super interesting. She has done a lot of work since then on like climate change and things as well. So she's just a really interesting, amazing woman, and I think a lot of people outside of Ireland would really appreciate her story as well, and yeah, would really get a lot out of it. So for Read a New to You author, I have 3 physical books that I have that are all new to me authors. The first one is called The Tainted. It's a historical fiction novel, and it's actually based in India, and it is based around these troop of English soldiers, some of which were Irish, that were in Southeast Asia, I think. And around this time, basically, there was a lot of things going on in Ireland politically, between like how England were treating Irish, and Ireland were obviously rebelling and trying to basically get full independence. And what happened was, this is based on true events of these Irish soldiers within the English regiment at the time, and they heard basically about this particular branch of mercenaries that were sent into Ireland by the English called the Black and Tans, who basically terrorised Irish people and did terrible, terrible things. And these soldiers found out about what had happened, and they basically like rebelled against their English commanders. And it's like this period of time when this happened in India, and I'd never heard of this, and this is just a book I found. I was looking at the Gooder Bookshop website and what Irish books they had on offer, and I saw this, and it just definitely piqued my interest that I'd never heard of it before, and I think it'll be really, really interesting. Covry is Indian Irish, so she calls herself a Paddy Indian on Twitter, which I absolutely love. So she, I think, was born in India, but she is now based in Ireland and has lived in Ireland for a very long time. And I'm just very excited to read this and see what it's about, and hopefully really enjoy it, because I think it's going to be really, really good. The other books I have are Leonard and Hungry Paul by Ronan Hessian. This is a book that I don't really know how to explain, because I don't really know what it's about. It's just basically, I'll read like what's on the back of it, because this is all I really know about it. It's Leonard and Hungry Paul are 2 quiet friends who see the world differently. They use humour, board games and silence to steer their way through the maelstrom that is the 21st century. And when I was looking at reviews of this, it was basically saying that it's just basically looking at how people can just live their lives, be nice, and not getting into any trouble, and it's supposed to be just like a really nice story, and I think at the moment we all just need nice stories as well. So I'm looking forward to reading this and seeing what it's actually about, and I can give you a proper review of it at the end of the month. Because I've had actually for a while, and I've been really looking forward to reading, and it's one that I have been keeping for this readathon, and that is The Glorious Guinness Girls by Emily Hurricane. This is basically around, I think, the daughters or the nieces of Arthur Guinness, who obviously created Guinness, and they basically were around kind of, I guess, the elite in like around the 1920s or so, in Dublin and London. And this is kind of looking at this family and the history, and it's like fictionalized obviously, but it's just a look at kind of the glamorous lives at the time, which is something very different to like other books you see based in Ireland around the time, because obviously you would normally see Ireland from the point of people who were struggling, or who, you know, weren't really well off, had to do kind of maybe menial jobs, where it'll be interesting to see that from someone who was like higher up. And yeah, it should be quite interesting to read about. The cover of this is absolutely stunning, as you can see. The dress is there, and this is the proof copy that I got last year, but I did actually buy a copy of this for a family member for Christmas, and the real copy has pictures near the back of it of the real family and kind of the real events and stuff, I think, that are talked about in this book. So I think if people were interested in that history, this would be a lovely book to have on your shelves, because it does have that additional insight of the pictures as well. So for the challenge of reading a book by or about a person of colour, as well as or person within the queer community, the Henna Wars does suit for that, as I said. I could also use the Tainted for that, as obviously cover is Indian Irish, as I said. And then some recommendations I have for this as well would be Exciting Times by Nisha Dolan, who Nisha Dolan I think she's gay, and then the character Ava is bisexual, and this shows a bisexual relationship. And then there's also Queen of Coin and Whispers by Helen Corcoran. This is the proof copy. I do have a finished copy at home somewhere, but this is my proof copy. And this is one actually I will be rereading on audiobook for the Irish Readathon as well, because I have the audiobook that is narrated by the girl who played Queen Susan in Narnia, which is really cool. So I'm looking forward to that in March. This is a YA fantasy with a female-female relationship, and Helen Corcoran herself is gay as well. To read for the challenge, reading a book with mythology or folklore, this is the one I've actually so far had the most questions about on different platforms, because this is one people seem to be struggling a little bit. For myself, I am going to actually be reading Savage Her Reply by Deirdre Sullivan. This was actually sent to me by the lovely Leanne, who is my co-host for this readathon just before Christmas. And oh, there's the note from her there, and I can't wait to read this because I've loved the other books I've read by Deirdre Sullivan, and this is a retelling of The Children of Lear, as far as I know. And this is actually going to kind of make me I'm going to reread Tangleweed and Brine by Deirdre Sullivan, which, as you can see, is absolutely beautiful. This is basically a collection of reimagined fairy tales, and it just has some like beautiful illustrations. And I really enjoyed this book the first time I read it, and I'm just really looking forward to sitting down and going through it again. There are some particular stories in this that I really loved. The Frog Prince was one that I remember, and Snow White I think is another that's really good in this book. So I'm looking forward to those. Another book that I do have that has literally been on my TBR for the Irish Readathon for the last few years, and I just haven't read it. It's just one of those books that for some reason gets put on a lot of TBRs and I never actually read it, and that is In Other Lands by Sarah Rees Brennan. This is based around kind of just folklore and fairies and things like that, and it's about a character I think who ends up going into some sort of fairy world. So in that sense it's a little bit based around folklore, and maybe around just the folklore on fairies, and maybe not necessarily like Irish fairies, but Sarah Rees Brennan is Irish, so I'm not exactly sure like how closely aligned it is to like the Celtic folklore tales, but I'll be looking forward to find out if I get to it this year. It's not officially on my TBR because I feel like I curse myself by putting it on my TBR and then I never get to it, but it's kind of like half on it, but maybe I'll pick it up, maybe I won't, we will see. So some other recommendations for the folklore would be The Surface Breaks by Louise O'Neill. That's a retelling of The Little Mermaid, so that will kind of work in terms of mythology or folklore. And as well, a book that I recently read and absolutely loved and raved about and have a whole video review on is The Daughter of the Forest by Juliette Marillier. This is based in ancient Ireland. It is a retelling of the Wild Swans. I think I call it the Wild Swans, but I think it might be the Six Swans. But there's also kind of touches of the Children of Lear to it as well. So I really enjoyed this one. It is a chunky one, so if you did want one that would take you through the entire month, this would definitely be a good one. If you're like a slower reader, or if you're a fast reader, you might be able to get through it in a week or two. But this is one I absolutely adored, and definitely one I recommend for this prompt. I would also recommend Ruth Frances Long. She has the Dove Lynn series that also is closely linked to folklore and fairies and Irish stories around kind of mythical creatures and things like that. That's also really, really great, and I would recommend that. I think I have done a video review of that in the past, so I will leave that linked below as well if people wanted to check that out to see if it's something they might want to read. So there is lots there. If anyone has any other questions or looking for any specific recommendations as well, just let me know down below. I'm really looking forward to hopefully reading all of these books in March. It is ambitious, but I'm very excited about it, so I'm hoping that my excitement and my love for this readathon will just really drive me. March is generally my best reading month of the year because of this readathon, so I think it's going to be another great reading month, and I just cannot wait to dive into all of these books. And I'll see you guys again next time. Bye.